Hey guys, welcome to Electronic Dance Money, your number one business resource for making money as electronic musicians and producers. Host Christian Casito, and we're back with another solo episode. You guys just get me today. We're going to hang out. We're going to talk some music business stuff. This episode's going to kind of go off of what we normally do. We're going to be doing a breakdown from the title. You guys are probably wondering what the hell this episode's about. But we're going to be talking about this band called the Maine. Now, if you know me personally, you probably know that way back when, before I was extremely into electronic music, I was super into pop punk bands, alternative rock bands. I would go to Warped Tour every single year. I loved bands like the Maine, Forever the Sickest Kids, Of Mice and Men, Attack, Breathe Carolina, before they were Breathe Carolina now, DJs and EDM producers. Same with, why am I blanking on their names? Cash, believe it or not, yeah, Cash, they were like an alternative pop punk type of band. Same with Breathe Carolina. You guys should check out some of just Google Breathe Carolina Warped Tour and you'll be able to find some of their old stuff. It was completely different, and there was a lot more of them too. I think there was like 4 or 5 guys in the band. Same with Cash. Classic stuff though. It was funny to see their transition and be like, oh my god, yeah, I used to listen to these guys all the time, and now here they are as DJs and producers after I've switched what I used to listen to. But regardless, one of my favorite bands during that time period, which was from like 2008 to probably 2011, 2012, when I started to make that transition, one of my favorite bands was the Maine. I've seen them probably more times than I've seen any other producer or DJ, actually. I think I've probably seen them 7 or 8 times, maybe even close to 10. Whenever they would come through my town, which was multiple times, I would see them. I've seen them at Warped Tour multiple times. And they're a great band if you guys look up the Maine. But the reason why we're going to be talking about them today is because they've been making music as a band for, I think, since 2007, maybe 2006. Going 14, 15 years strong as a band, and they're still selling out venues in a genre that you would think was dead or is dying. I mean, Warped Tour is all but gone. It does not go to the same cities that it used to. I think it only goes to major big cities. And so, and if you look at all these bands from when that genre was big, which was around the time that I was listening to it, there were a lot of people going to Warped Tour. A lot of people getting into, think of the era of 303, when 303 was huge, when Don't Trust Me came out, and they had their one album came out, and then Streets of Gold came out after that. I was a huge 303 fan as well. Saw them a ton of times. But if you look at that era and the bands that were big back then, most of them are gone. Most of the bands were established and, pushed through till probably 2013, 2014. And then there was this shift and people stopped seeing them. People stopped supporting those artists. But there's some bands that managed to stay around. They managed to keep their fan base and grow it to a massive extent. And one of those bands is the Maine. They have over 1 million followers now, and back then, if you looked at like their Instagram or Facebook followers in 2012, 2013, it was probably less than 250,000, probably less than 100,000. And so they've exploded their relevancy, and their following is unmatched compared to so many of the bands out there. So how were they to push themselves through this 14, 15-year journey, and they're still continuing to sell out. They're still full-time musicians as a band in a genre you would think was dying. Because let's be honest, it's hard to maintain that status quo as a musician unless you're, if we're talking as EDM producers and DJs, it's hard to maintain that relevancy for so long. But there's a way to do it. And obviously there is a way to do it because we're talking about a band here who is in a dying genre and they've managed to establish themselves. And they managed to help inspire me as well. I mean, they're a major inspiration to a lot of people. And I'm sure a lot of musicians out there, they have great songwriting abilities. All of the musicians are just so fantastic. They are one of the bands that pushed me to want to get into music. And then ultimately when I found electronic music and production, that's where I started leaning to. And I was like, yep, this is the route that I want to go. So I've written down and I've analyzed, I've been spending a lot of time thinking about this. And so I've been, digging through their social media stuff. And over the years, what have they done to maintain relevancy? And there's one thing that sticks out. Well, really two things that stick out the most. But in terms of music, when we're talking about writing, when we're talking about releasing, marketing, promotion, which is probably one of the most important factors, it's, how you're growing your audience, how you're staying relevant. There's one thing that sticks out above the rest, and it's something that is not found a lot in electronic music, and that's releasing albums versus singles. In right now with EDM production and DJing and the music industry within electronic music, a good majority of the time you're seeing people release singles. And, there's a cost benefit to releasing an album versus a single. Let's first go ahead and take a look at a single. So the benefit of releasing singles is the amount of singles that you can put out. If you've got your production game down and you know how to write a track really fast, you can get a single out within a few weeks. And so at that rate, you could, and ultimately you would imagine you'd get better and you'd get faster to a point where you could release a couple of singles a month, if not even more than that. So you can put out this massive amount of content and music, but the thing is as soon as you release something, the thing that got released prior and before has kind of become irrelevant. So you have to fight that. And I mean, that can either be a blessing or a curse, just depending on your situation. And, if you write a very classic tune that gets played on the radio and becomes a hit, it will become timeless. But the odds of that happening are so slim. So you have to kind of keep up with the rat race of a single. And once you release a single, people are expecting you to release another single pretty shortly. So you're kind of on these time constraints and you have to fight with that. Now, match that with the fact that there's so many other singles out there being released and you have to fight against those. It kind of becomes a race against the clock, and you got to get more and more out. And you only have this one chance to promote this one track for a week, and if it doesn't hit, you're fucked. And then you got to move on to the next one. And you kind of do this repeat process, and if you don't see any success out of your singles, then you go, well, what the hell am I doing wrong? You don't have time for people. You're not giving people time to marinate on what you have and give them enough content to be able to actually see it one day. And maybe it has nothing to do with the actual promotion you're doing, but it has to do with the time that you're posting on social media, and that's not the time that your audience is on, so they're not seeing it. And so there are these issues that come into play with that, with singles. And, if you've already promoted the hell out of the single and you didn't get any feedback from it, you didn't see any success from it, and you're like, well, maybe it is the time that I'm posting. Well, now you have to wait until the next single comes out to start promoting it and change your time that you're starting to promote stuff and post. So you can see how there's this real issue. And again, now you're racing against the clock. Oh, I got to get in the studio. I got to write another track. That way I can promote it and test this out now. There's an issue with that. Now, what the hell does, me talking about singles and promoting singles have to do with albums, or what the Maine does to stay relevant and how you can stay relevant? Well, let's flip the script now and let's look at albums. Let's look at what the Maine does and what a lot of bands do in general. A lot of the time they're releasing albums. Now, I've heard many producers and many DJs tell me, "Oh, well, albums are dead in the music industry for electronic music, or in general with bands, albums are dead." And I don't believe that for a split second. I think albums are alive and well. There's plenty of big producers out there that are still writing albums. I have more albums that I'm in love with than singles. I have more albums that I go back to and re-listen over and over and over again than I do singles. I've listened to albums front to back more than I've put a single on repeat. And I bet there's more people out there like that. I'm sure if you're listening to this, you could probably name an album that you go back to that provides this thing of nostalgia for you. And there's a story written within those albums if they're written properly. Cosmic Gate's Start to Feel is one of my favorite albums of all time. Tritonal's Piercing the Quiet, one of my favorite albums of all time. W&W's album Impact, one of my favorite albums of all time. And then there's so many bands. 303's Want album, I listen to that at least a few times a year from front to back. It's such a great album. So good, so creative, so unique. The Maine's Can't Stop, Won't Stop album, one of my favorite albums of all time. Same with Black and White. The Way We Talk, that's an EP. But I mean, they write these great albums every single year. They've released an album almost every single year for 14 years. Pretty close. Maybe it's, there's some every other year instances, but for a good majority of the time, they're writing at least an EP or an album every single year, and they're putting it out. And if they're not putting out an album that year, they're probably releasing singles from an album that's going to be released in the next year. And so, and this is what you'll see a lot of like EDM producers when they're releasing an EP or an album, they'll usually release like the title track, a single that's a title track for the album or EP coming up, and maybe they'll release another track, and they'll kind of promote those over a 2 to 3 month period before the album comes out, and then the album will drop. I think Tritonal did this with Painting with Dreams. They had like 3 or 4 singles come out that they promoted, and they released over probably a 4-month period, maybe 6 months, and then they announced, hey, we have an album coming out. They started doing pre-orders, they started selling merch for it, they started doing pre-orders for vinyl, all of that fun stuff, and then the album actually came out at some point. So why should you do that? Well, one of the biggest things with an album is it's not this one hit thing with like a single where you only have a couple of weeks to promote it and then it's kind of dead. An album lasts for a while. People will listen to it a couple of times when it's initially released, because the first time they're just getting a feel for the entire album. The second time they're re-listening it and finding out the tracks that they really love. And then the third time, they're usually playing their favorite tracks from the album, and they're sharing it. And so people will do that over it depends on how busy people are, how often they listen to it, but you can find that people will do that in an entire week, or they'll take an entire month to do that. And so there's this ever-long process of promoting the different tracks from the album and the album itself and sharing it when people find a new song that they really love. There's been times I've listened to entire albums, thought I hated a song on it, and then after I re-listened to it a few times, it turned out to be one of my favorite songs from the entire album, and that will happen. So when you have an album, you no longer just have a single to promote. You've got, depending on the size of it, 8, 10, 12, 15 tracks that you can promote, not necessarily individually, because there may be ones on there that don't really stand up to promote individually, but it's still there to promote. The album as a whole is still there to promote. You can spend the first month promoting the entire album, finding the best tracks that people are playing the most, and starting to promote those tracks over the next few months as well. This is this is so and so's favorite track from the album that we released 2 months ago. Here, you can make all this different content assorted around that. Now, what are the other options that you have? Well, you also have remixes. You can send the album out to artists to remix and remix the biggest tracks. You can make there's people who make entire EPs for remix of like the biggest hit from the album, and that gets released as an EP. And then there's another track that, the second biggest hit, you send out to other people to get remixed, and there's a whole EP that you release with that. And so you can be promoting that. Now, if you're seeing what I'm explaining here, you can spend, instead of, trying to get as many singles out as possible and promoting those one individually over the course of a year, you can write an entire album and promote the entire album for an entire year while you're writing the next album for the next year. And all this promotion and content is done through remixes, rewrites of the best tracks of the album as well, going in, making acoustic versions. I know Gareth Emery does this. I think he did this with 100 Reasons to Live and his Drive album, I'm pretty sure. Again, two of my favorite albums of all time. I can name you more albums that I love than singles. It's hard to remember a single. It's pretty easy to remember an album, especially when it's written in the sense of a story, and it's got it just, everything kind of works together within that album. A really well written album tells a story, and it relates to people, and people enjoy that. But when you are writing an album, you're writing content for an entire year that you can start promoting. Being able to rewrite and make your own remixes to promote later on, and that stuff is easy to do when the layout's already done, and you can scrap some other elements and start readjusting the production. It's easy to do rewrites of tracks, and then you can start releasing those. And people like that. Ooh, I love this song from the album. Now there's a fresh, new, different version of it. There's so much content to be produced and shared with albums, and so many different giveaways you can do with it. There's there's a reason why tours are bred out of albums. Every band and every major artist who releases an album does an album tour, and it's because they're promoting the album the entire time. Well, and not to mention the fact that you're going to probably make more money on a tour than you do the actual album itself, but you're still promoting that music. A tour album is always named after the album itself because you're promoting the album and the tracks on the album. And you could essentially do the same thing with EPs. I mean, you could release 2 or 3 EPs throughout the year and do the same thing. But again, you're doing more you're having to do more work with that rather than being able to write an entire an entire album and start promoting that and all that fun stuff. But this was the biggest factor that I noticed is, if you go look up the Maine, like them on Facebook and scroll through their Facebook, and what you're going to see is almost, I'd say probably 70 to 80% of their content is promoting their most recent album. If it's not that, they're digging into the nostalgia bin and talking about old tracks or what they did in the past, and they're promoting some of their more popular stuff from the past. That's always kind of remained true to their fans. But for a majority of the content, it's promoting the most recent album, whether or not that album was released 8 months ago. Now, when you have a new album coming up, that's when you kind of switch it. It goes from 7 or 8 months later, we're going to stop promoting the album from before, and we're going to start promoting the new album coming up in 2 months. And we're going to start doing giveaway stuff and promotional content and whatever you need to do to prepare for that release. I think albums are a more consistent way of creating super fans if you can tell a good story and catch someone at a good point in their life, or even if they're in a bad position in their life and that album brings them happiness, they'll want to return to that happiness or that state of mind by re-listening to your album later on and get that that beat of nostalgia. And so this is how you can maintain relevancy, by getting people to come back. It's just like any other business. Businesses are only successful because of their repeat customers and repeat clients. Those repeat customers and repeat clients become super fans. They spread the word for you. They do word of mouth. And it's the exact same thing if you can write a great album or even a great single. But the point is when you're doing that is you're trying to get a fan to come back. You want people to come back. You don't want to be a one-hit wonder. One-hit wonders have one great track and people don't like the rest. They can't relate to the rest and they don't come back. If you can write a great album and have great tracks on the album that draws this sense of feeling for people, they'll come back to it at some point to get the nostalgia feel. Majority of the albums I listen to are because I was going through a certain phase when I was listening to that album, and I want to remember that feeling or that time in place and get that nostalgic feeling. It's why albums stick out more than singles. Singles come and go, but albums do stay. Those stay with people. Now, the next thing that it pretty much plays into what we're talking about here in terms of an album that I noticed from their pages, what they're doing so well is the fact that they recognize that content is king. They have so much content that they're putting out. Now, they very clearly have a team behind that's helping provide that content. You might not be able to put out that much content, and that's okay. You don't need to right now. You just need to put out enough content. And really, you have to decide how much content is enough. And we've talked about content and what that looks like. But what sticks out with the Maine is the fun content that they put out, the engaging content. They get their fans involved with stuff. I think they were doing a contest. It might have been I think they might have been promoting an album. I can't remember. But they selected some people off of social media, I believe it was. People entered into some sort of contest to get a phone call from each of the members of the Maine. So it was, and they cut it together in an entire video, like a 3 to 5 minute video, and they just hung out and talked to, like, personally, one-on-one with a very specific member, would call them, talk to them on the phone. And I think this was during COVID stuff. So I actually believe they might have been promoting a live stream concert that they were doing, but they were promoting content. And through that content, they were getting their fans involved and engaged, and people liked that. They shared that. They were a part of it. And it's a great experience. They just did an interview. I think they actually, was it with AP? Can't remember if they did an interview with AP. It was an interview with someone, but they were looking back on the AP tour that they did in 2009. And this might have been an interview from maybe it was 2010. I can't remember if the interview was done in 2020 or 2019, but it was a 10-year anniversary, and it's got to be 2019 the interview was from, and they were looking back on the AP tour from 2009, which I saw them on that tour, funny enough. And they were looking back on they were 10 years younger. They had to have been like 20-ish. Super young, one of their first major tours, and they were looking back at some of the footage that was shot there and kind of making fun of themselves. And it was a fun, engaging piece of content. And people like me who went on that tour could be involved in it in a sense of like, yeah, I was here at that show. I remember this song. I remember that performance. I remember this, and that. And it creates this great, engaging, fun content that people are talking about. You know, they're commenting, tagging with their friends, sharing with their old friends that they used to go to these shows with. So fun, engaging content helps maintain that relevancy. Again, they're really playing that nostalgia game with that, like that interview, looking back in the past. They play this nostalgia game with themselves and with their fans who have been around since the beginning. Now, since COVID started, they did do, like most people, a switch was flipped for them, and they couldn't play these venues, these big shows, and sell out these shows. So they started to do more live streaming concert stuff. And this is where I was talking about, I'm pretty sure they were calling up fans who had bought tickets, and it was a giveaway or some sort of contest, but they were talking about the live stream. So there's ways to, if you're doing live stream stuff, there's ways to make it engaging for fans and other people. Now, obviously, this is if you're listening to this and you're a real young producer with barely any social media following, it's going to be a lot trickier to get real hyped up people that are excited for you to call them, especially if you're promoting a live stream show. This is going to be for people who have a more dedicated following and a bigger fan base who are actually listening and watching what they do. But if you're getting into the live stream space, like we talked about in the last two episodes, and you're starting to grow that audience, and you actually have an audience for live streaming, and you want to do a live stream concert, and you want to sell tickets to it, well, now you actually have the audience where you can call people that are hyped up about it. You can cut it into a video and use that as a really cool promotional tool. Now let's flip the script one more time and go on to the last thing that we're going to be talking about. And this is probably going to be a bit of a shorter one, but I do want to make this next topic into a dedicated episode. I have a couple of guests in mind, but I think it's going to take some time to get them on the show because they're a little bit bigger than most of my guests, so they're going to be a bit trickier to get into contact with and actually get them in on an interview. But one of the other things that makes the Maine such a great band and something that's relevant and maintains this growth of new fans, new and old fans really, is how much fun their live shows are. They create a memory, they create an experience, something like nothing else. Like I've said, I've seen them close to a dozen times. I've lost count how many times I've seen them, but there's one show in particular that is the most memorable above the rest. Now, I think I had to have been something like 13 or 14 when I went to this show. It was like 3 hours outside of my hometown in Boise in Blackfoot, Idaho. And funny enough, like none of these bands have ever been to Blackfoot, and they were all, I talked to a number of them, and they're like, yeah, I have no idea why we're playing a show here and not in Boise where they normally play. But I think the lineup was A Rocket to the Moon, The Maine, Cobra Starship, and Boys Like Girls. And I believe it was in that order that they played. Rocket to the Moon, something like that. Ton of fun. It was such a great show. Packed house, completely sold out. Now, whenever I was going to these shows, I would always go front row. Up until probably when I was seeing, I think the last time I went front row for a show was DOS Energy 2014. Yeah, but no, DOS Energy 2013. It's the last time I went front row for a show, saw Hardwell. And then after that, I was like, nope, I'm done with fucking going front row. This shit sucks. So, I went to the show with my sister and a couple of her friends, and I remember we were all underage. I think we were all under the age of like 16. And my aunt had to drive us. So she drove us to Blackfoot, Idaho. We went to the show, and I was front row for the Maine. And John O'Callaghan, the lead singer of the Maine, came up on their most popular song ever was probably Girls Do What They Want. Probably, maybe not anymore, but it's a classic. It's one of the songs that blew them up in 2008. And so they were playing that song, and the lead singer came over and was trying to pull my sister up on stage to sing it, but she wouldn't go up there. And so I was like, fuck it, I'll go. And the dude pulled me up on stage, and I got to sing on stage in front of like 1,000 people with them. One of the most memorable experiences I've ever had at a show. It was so much fun. After the song, they ended the show, and they let me go backstage with them. They got me a shirt. I talked to everyone, hung out, and then after that, I left. But it was so damn cool. It was one of the coolest fucking experiences I've ever had. The second coolest might be when Dada Life, and if you guys have ever seen Dada Life, then you know that they're all about bananas and they're all about smiles. bananas, champagne, and smiles. And so if you wear a banana suit to Dada Life, they invite everyone with a banana suit up on stage to hang out and dance for like an entire song. And I got to go do that as well. Those are some of the most memorable experiences, is being able to get up on stage with performers and artists. Now, I'm not saying that you should do that for every single show. It's always best if you actually have fans there to see you and know what you know your music. But the point is if you can find a way to make your shows more memorable and create an experience, you're going to create these super fans and new fans that always come back for more. You stay relevant. When you come back to their town to play, or you're playing near them, they want to go see you. There's a reason why we drove 3 hours to go see the Maine, and it had to have been 2009, maybe 2010. Look at people like Steve Aoki. I mean, he throws cake at his shows. Dada Life sprays people with champagne. They have pillow fights. They pull people up on stage. There's ways to make your shows fun and engaging other than just being on the mic and telling everyone to jump in 1, 2, 3. Everyone does that, and that can be a little bit boring at times. So if you can find a way to make your shows creative, engaging, and getting the crowd involved and your fans involved, you're gonna create people who talk about their their experience 10 years later on a podcast like I'm doing now. And that is pretty much it for today's episode, and this kind of analysis of how you can build up relevancy, what you guys can learn from the Maine. And go check them out. Go listen to their music. Go check out their social media and how they're doing things, because they're doing things right. They're probably not your genre, but I will say they know how to promote. They know how to stay relevant. They know how this business works. And watch what they do. Follow them, because they're doing all of the right things. You can learn a lesson or two from them. They are massively big, and they're only growing, even out of COVID. As always, head to enviousaudio.com/episode 45 to check out the show notes. Leave a review on iTunes or Apple Podcast. Hang out in the Electronic Dance Money Facebook community. Go ahead and look us up there. I'm pretty sure I'm going to start doing some live stream stuff. So if you're already in the group, you're probably going to get a notification that I'm going live this coming Friday, which, I mean, if you're listening to this when it comes out, it'll be Friday the 22nd. You'll probably get a notification saying that I'm going live, and I'll be playing the episode, hanging out in the comments, talking to people. So if you want to be a part of that, if you want to ask questions live, listen to it, hang out with other people, do a little watch party, look up Electronic Dance Money Community on Facebook, join it. I will accept it. We'll hang out. Go ahead and ask questions. If you have any music business questions, need help with anything, reach out there. Other than that, I've got some cool things lined up for the next few episodes, some great guests, so I'm super excited for that stuff. But I'm hoping as well, as we get more into 2021, the podcast may go to weekly. That's what I'm hoping for. We'll see what happens. My business is starting to get pretty crazy, and I'm starting to automate some stuff and put some work off, including editing the podcast and all that fun stuff. So I'm hoping I'll be able to get that put off, and if that's the case, I'll be able to record more episodes for you guys. So other than that, I'll talk to you guys later. Take care.